So hello and welcome to the Expat Pod. My name is James, your host. Today I'm joined by John. And John, you and I went to school together, which was, a long time ago now, and we haven't spoke for God knows how long, about 13 years, is it? But you found that I did an interview with Andy, and you actually went with him to China. So it's a good chance for us to understand about your journey. If you want to give us a quick introduction about, I guess, who you are, where you've lived, and what you do.
Yeah, sure. So my name's John. I've lived in Formby most of my life, and I've also lived in Lancaster when I was at university, and I lived in Shanghai for a year in China and Guangzhou for 6 months, which was cut short due to illness, and I've been back in Formby ever since.
Wonderful, and we'll get into the podcast and it's all about how you navigated your life through those places. So welcome to section 1 of the podcast about getting there. So John, this is where I try and get a flavour from my guests about the kind of journey to going abroad. So it's all about the admin, the many things you have to tick off your list before you get a chance to leave. So it's all about, up until you go to the airport, all the things that happen for that. So if we talk about your kind of journey to China, was this when you finished uni?
No, what happened is it was right at the beginning of third year of university for me. So we're talking about October of 2013. Of course, like a lot of people, I was thinking, what the hell am I going to do when I graduate? And there's like 10 billion options I was thinking of. And then one day when I was checking my uni email, as you do, I saw that there was an email for someone who was going to give a talk about teaching English in China. I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. I'll go down and, go to this event and learn more about it. And I decided from there to go through the application process. And the main motivation at the time for it was I hadn't traveled as much as I would have liked to at that point. And I thought there's going to be very few times in your life where I'm going to be in a situation like I was at that time where I had no responsibilities, like no career, family, basically nothing tying me down in the UK. And also, crucially, as we'll get on to, good health as well. So I had nothing tying me down. So I thought, take this opportunity while you can and, make the most of it. So that was the main motivation for applying in the first place.
So when you saw this kind of advert come up, did you think about living abroad before or going on like a exchange program or anything?
Not specifically an exchange program when I was at university. I do vaguely remember seeing something similar about going to Korea, and I think a few years prior to that, but I think for whatever reason that had just gone out of my mind at that point, or I think I was still in first year at that time, and around that I was applying like crazy for internships and various different things, and got close with some of them, but in the end none of them materialized. It was more as soon as I saw it and went down to the talk that this is a good option for me. It wasn't like that was the plan from the very beginning, as it were.
Nice. And then so October 2013 was when you kind of started the ball rolling. Then you went to this talk.
Yeah.
And was there a lot of you going, or was it a handful of people?
From what I remember, in terms of who went and who was in my cohort when we went to Beijing, there was only one other person that was from Lancaster that had gone to the same talk as me. I mean, some of those other people may well have decided to go to a different country or through a different program or whatever, but there's, from off the top of my head, just one person besides me that I remember that was kind of with me from start to finish, as it were.
Were there any prerequisites you needed to kind of do before you kind of went? Did you have to have a certain grade or anything like that?
I think you just needed to be a graduate in any discipline. Obviously, it had to come from English-speaking country, or I think there were exceptions if say you, like, I knew a girl who was from Lithuania who did the program, so I think there were exceptions provided that you had, all the qualifications, degree from an English-speaking country, that you're in good health, so I had to get a certificate completed by my GP, saying I was in good health, no criminal records, and then the company paid them a fee. Can't remember what it was now. It's maybe like £100 or £200 or something like that. And they basically, they asked, what you want to do in terms of, say, like age group. And I think initially I opted for middle school age, so teenager kind of age. And then, a few months later, they're like, yeah, we found you a position. And also where you want to go as well, because I did say from the outset I wanted to go to Shanghai. And my thinking with that was, I don't know if you've ever been to China yourself, but I was thinking China's going to be quite different to the UK. And if I go to a city that's quite developed like Shanghai, that's probably going to ease me in a bit more. And then if I like China, I can, branch out into, possibly more remote places. I think it's a fantastic city to start out in China, in my opinion.
No, I haven't been. I've been nearly going several times. We used to work for Shanghai Automotive, the car company, who had an office in Birmingham. And every time I would get close to getting my visa stuff sent out, they would can the trip because of money. So I've nearly gone several times, and yeah, I'd love to go. I'd like to go for work because it's expensive to get there, so it'd be quite a good time to go. And you need to have a special visa or an invitation to go visit, I believe, as well. I think there's something like that for maybe it's just for work, but
yeah, I think the process has changed now since I've been there, and I believe it's become a lot more complicated and a lot more expensive than when I did it. But basically, you have to find an employer that can sponsor you, and then they get paperwork from various government departments in China, and then they send you that paperwork. And with that paperwork and plus your application form, you then apply for the visa. But the visa that they give you might have changed name now, but was the Z visa at the time. You enter China on that, and then within 30 days, you have to convert it to a residence permit, which is basically like a multiple entry visa, for lack of a better description.
And then, so once you'd been to talk and you found out a bit more about it, which company did you actually use to support you?
I don't know if they're still running. I mean, they were just called Teach English in China, abbreviated to TEIC. Yeah, so they're like a small non-profit organization that worked with various education bureaus in China, to help recruit foreigners that wanted to go over and teach English.
Wow, that's good. And were they really, really helpful with you in terms of helping you get your documents? Did they give you like a list of things to do before going to the embassy to get your visa?
Yeah, they were very helpful in terms of laying out what was required and things like that. And also one of the good things is when I was going through the visa process, of course, one of the things that did hold it up quite a bit was, I was graduating in 2014, and obviously I was going to go out in 2014. So that was kind of like the last step. But I think they said, or the employer said via them, that if you can get a letter from the university basically confirming that you're a student and that you're due to graduate this year, that's also acceptable. So they were pretty like adaptive and, ready to support you through the process. And then, getting you, like I remember they sent me this big pack of information once it was all ready to go and I was going, in terms of what the Beijing program was going to entail, that that Andy also did, and then what would happen from there. So yeah, it was pretty detailed, and they were always available to be contacted if you had any questions and things like that.
And then what were your family thinking about you about to leave to go to China and stuff at that time? How was that kind of taken?
Well, my mum admitted to me years later that for a very long time she didn't really believe me that I was going, and it was just like a phase or a fad. And I think it was pretty much not until I think it was the point I got my visa, which is about 6 days-ish before I was due to go out, that it sort of finally hit it, like, oh my God, he actually is going. But although it was hard for, my dad, not so much my brother, good old sibling rivalry and all that, they thought they supported, and, for the reasons that I said, that, while you've got a chance to do something like this, do it. Because, you never know what life has planned for you and could all be taken away at some point. So
yeah, completely. And I wish I'd done more things when I was a student. I did Camp America, which is pretty cool, but I wish I'd gone further afield and done a semester abroad. But it's still definitely worth doing. And in terms of things before we moved, then you didn't really have many things that went to your parents' house whilst you were away, or did you have to sell things because you just kind of cancelled your student accommodation and just left, I guess? Nothing too busy to think about in terms of life admin?
Not really, because I finished all my exams at the end of May and I wasn't going to China until August. So came home and I had to do some like online e-learning to get a certificate, before I went. It's a pretty standard thing. Of course, it doesn't really prepare you for teaching it all, but it's just a box ticking exercise and all of that. But because I was in like a transition period between finishing my studies and going to China, wasn't that particularly hectic. Just wanted to enjoy being home while I was still there. And of course, it was, the Brazil World Cup at the time. So I remember enjoying that.
So good point. Wonderful. And then I guess, is there anything else you needed to kind of do before you kind of took to your journey to China?
Well, just packed everything in the kitchen sink, as it were, like anything and everything I could think of went into the suitcase. And obviously figured that at the end of the day I can always get stuff when I'm there. But I did figure as well it'd be kind of like a learning exercise anyway, because I've not done this before. And, I'm sure there's lots of people who do things differently, about studying, like moving abroad and all of that, knowing what they know now. But I would say is, wouldn't say there was any particular issues that I had. I mean, talking about like 10 years ago now, but there's nothing that's particularly popping out.
Wonderful. Well, I guess we can get into section 2 about being there. So welcome back to the podcast, and welcome to section 2, all about being there. So John, this is kind of to get a flavour of your experiences there. So we'll start off when you first arrived. Then you arrived in Beijing, was it?
Yes.
And what was that like as a first impression when you first arrived? Did it live up to your expectations, or was it completely different?
To be honest, my first memory is that once I'd cleared, immigration, all that, was in arrivals looking for the people from the company, found them along with a few other people who had arrived at a similar time to me, and we got a taxi ride to the hotel, and it was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life.
Oh,
yeah, it was like rush hour Beijing traffic, and it was pretty scary. I suppose I remember like the first time me and the guy I was sharing a room with, who I've stayed friends with ever since. And like we were saying before we started, he's lived in China, Russia, and now Germany. I remember even the first time when we left the hotel, just have a look around, because especially the UK, we have this very negative image of China being like a police state and stuff. So I was kind of like watching myself everywhere I was going, like thinking I'd get like, I don't know, stopped or arbitrarily arrested for like no reason, all that kind of stuff. And then I realized pretty quickly that that none of that's warranted at all. The thing with Chinese food, like I would say it's not really appropriate to call it Chinese food because the country's so big. Every area has its own style of cooking. I mean, some of the food was amazing. Some of it was like the worst food I've ever had. But I'd say it was, my first impression of China was like controlled chaos.
Entropy then.
Yeah.
What was your first kind of, so you went to Beijing, how long were you in Beijing for? Was it for the training? Was it a month or?
It was 2 weeks.
And did you get much time off to explore, or was it quite a lot of time to kind of be in the sessions?
I think I arrived on the Monday. I think Tuesday was roughly that time everyone arrived, and they had us like doing classes on Wednesday, and I was still really jet lagged by then. I think we had like maybe one day off where I think we went to Mutiananyu, which is a section of the Great Wall of China, and then we had like duck afterwards. That was really cool. But apart from that, and the day like we were leaving now, it was like every day was classes.
Did you get a chance to go out in Beijing much, so and kind of go to bars or clubs or anything?
One day, me and the guys sharing the room with Mark was his name. We went to Tiananmen Square and like had a look around there. And because at that time, I don't know if you follow football much or not, but at that time the Chinese Super League was starting to become bigger and a lot more noticeable. So we're actually looking for the like Beijing Guoan Stadium, because they're the main team in Beijing, and around how look the same. We found it. Wasn't anything going on because there was no matches, and unlike the UK, it's not like, say, if you go to Anfield or Old Trafford or probably most of the big stadiums in the UK, was quite a lot going on even when it's not match day. But yeah, it was just dead. What I remember.
No, I do follow football. I am a Liverpool fan. My parents are Everton fans, so I was quite unpopular in my family. So then you moved to Shanghai after the first 2 weeks then. So what was that journey like, going from Beijing to Shanghai? Was there many of you going to Shanghai together?
Yeah, there was quite a few of us that were going to Shanghai. We're one of like the largest contingents. So I remember actually the last night, everyone, most people were going out, to clubs and bars and all of that to, just enjoy the last night, that kind of thing. And Mark said to me, he's like, John, a story we talk about sometimes that each other's like, John, it's the last night, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm going to bed. It's like, 10 p.m. and I've got to be up at like our train to Shanghai was really early. It was like 4:30, or we had to be up at like 5 in the morning or something like that. So like, I'm going to bed. So, but it's the last night after. I'm like, no, I need my sleep. And plus clubbing and stuff isn't really my thing anyway. So the next morning, we all got on a coach to a train station in Beijing. I can't remember which, or I think it might have been, I think it's Beijing West is the main one. I think we went there. And then we got the high-speed train from Beijing to Shanghai, which is about 5 hours-ish. Although I remember the guy I was sat next to, he'd been out all night, and I think he'd only slept about 30 minutes. So he was just dead the whole journey. The guy, it was his roommate, because he was going to Changsha as well, I think, and he was going much later in the day, but he knew that he had to be up and ready to go to Shanghai, and he said like 30 minutes or so before the pickup, he'd like, wake up, and then help him like just cram all of his stuff into a suitcase. Then we arrived in Shanghai, where we met by people from the company that we're all going to work for, and then we went to the hotel that we'd been like booked in for the week. And then for the rest of that week, it was mainly like orientation, learning about the company, what we were going to be doing, where we were going, and all of that kind of stuff, and also finding a place to live, because with a lot of teaching jobs in China, usually the accommodation will be provided, but in Shanghai, that's not as common. So we had to get our own accommodation, albeit the company would, have people who would help us find accommodation to live in and things like that.
I mean, how did that happen? I mean, in terms of that, how was that kind of journey? Was it difficult? Was it quick? Was it, because Shanghai is huge, right?
Well, it's actually quite stressful, because one of the like massive, strokes of luck that I had when I was in Shanghai is originally I was going to be placed in quite a far out suburb called Qingpu. I think there's a metro, I think there's the Shanghai metro has expanded to there now, but at the time there wasn't one, so you had to get a bus, and it would take like an hour or maybe even 2 hours during rush hour to get to the city centre. So I was going to be based there, and then because of reasons that were never really explained properly, like, the school you were going to go to's can't take you now, so we're going to move you to the city centre of Shanghai instead. So I was like, sweet. But of course, accommodation was going to be a lot more expensive. So I remember they called them coordinators. So coordinators at the company I was working for were like they were Chinese staff, and they were like a bridge between the company, local schools, and us. So my coordinator took me and another teacher to look around at accommodation, and to be very honest with you, everything we found was either horrifically expensive and/or a massive dump.
Did you get one of these big dumps, or did you find somewhere else? Or?
I think it was like a Thursday or a Friday, and I think we had to check out of the hotel by Sunday. So I was quite stressed at this point. So God, I need to, because I didn't particularly enjoy living with strangers at uni that much. I wanted a place of my own, which I accepted was going to cost more than flat sharing. But that's what I really wanted to do at that time, because otherwise it would have just kind of felt like a continuation of uni life rather than post-uni life for me. It mattered to me. And I remember going on this directory, I can't remember what it was called now, but it was like a website that was focused on foreigners living in Shanghai. I think it might have been called This Is Shanghai. I think there's other versions of it, depending on what state you're in. And then I looked through their accommodation, and then I found one place where the apartment looked really, really good, and the price was quite reasonable, and it was crucially very close to one of the main metro stations. So I called them up, because again, if they're on here, they can speak English. And, it's like, hi, I'm calling about apartment reference, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, we've actually sold that one, but we have another one that's more or less exactly the same in somewhere else in the building if you want to come look at that one. I was like, okay, cool. I'll see you in an hour. So got the Shanghai Metro, and went to this apartment, and it was a really nice studio apartment in a really convenient area of the city. And it's like, so per the advert, it was like 3,000 RMB a month, which at the time would be about £300. And they're like, yep. And I was like, okay, shut up and take my money.
What?
So signed on the spot, went back to the hotel, got all my stuff in the suitcase, and moved in later that day. And I was very, very, very happy. Actually, because I remember one time, the first place I worked in Shanghai, because I moved after Chinese New Year to different schools, is we were all talking one day, because I worked with like 7, 8 other foreign teachers from, UK, America, Canada, etc., about where we lived and what our living arrangements were and all of that. And, you know, I live with like 4 other people near blah, blah station, all that. And actually, John, where do you live? I was like, I live here, which is like 1 stop from People's Square. I'm like, oh God, that must have cost a fortune. It's like, no, 3,000 RMB a month. I'm like, you know, what? We're paying like 4,000 RMB and we have to share like with 3 other people and stuff. But I think the reason, or I figured out much later the reason why I got it so cheap though, because when my mum was coming to visit me, this would have been February of 2015. One of the things that you have to do by law in China is that when you move into an apartment, you have to go to your local police station and register your address with the police. Now, if you're staying in a hotel, they do this for you as part of check-in. It's normal. But here I went to my police station, and I think I went the day before she was due to arrive. And I was like, yeah, my mum's coming tomorrow. I need to register her. And then the police said, you can't do that anymore for this building. I was like, why not? I said, because this building's classed as a commercial building now rather than residential. And indeed, it made sense because like next door to me, there was a bunch of like little offices and trade companies. I mean, heck, I think next door to me, there was like it was the same size flat, but there was like 10 guys in there, like living in bunk beds and stuff. So I think my landlord knew that change was coming and that they would make more money leasing it as an apartment rather than an office. So I think it was just a case of right place at the right time.
Wow, okay. So then did your mum end up going to a hotel, or how did you get her to kind of stay in? What was the workaround for that? Or did you just not register her?
No, she still came in because I had a sofa bed, or my sofa converted into a sofa bed. And then I think at one point we did go to a hotel and like registered her there. So it wasn't a big deal. From what I hear now about China, that probably would be a big deal. But back then, they were a lot more lax about stuff like that. I think it's more if you're going to live there long term and you don't do that, that's a big deal, and that's a problem. But for the short term tourists, I don't think they cared that much.
And then, out of curiosity, in terms of your rent was £300 a month. Was that a large chunk of your salary, or was that quite manageable?
Yeah, it was pretty manageable.
Because I don't know, because I guess salaries in China are not, compared to the UK, it's really cheap, right? For a studio apartment, I think I had a 1-bedroom flat in where I lived for £1,000, which was quite expensive. Yeah, that was a third of my salary on rent, and then actually after tax it's half my salary. But I don't know what it's like in terms of China compared to living abroad. If people want to go and be a teacher, is there a lot of room for travel and things as well? Or
oh yeah, absolutely there is. I mean, obviously you had a very long break for Chinese New Year, which again I got a sweet deal there because what happened? Well, actually, I didn't actually really go traveling when I was in China that much. I mainly just stayed in Shanghai because Shanghai was huge enough anyway, and so I'd just rather like save some money and just explore like different bits of Shanghai. But the first place I worked at wasn't really a school as such. It was a local government initiative in Jing'an. So Jing'an is like bang in the center of Shanghai. It's a very small district, very rich district. And what would happen is, rather than foreign teachers be based there, what would happen is that they would come to our location. So our location was called English Village. And there was 8 foreign teachers, including me, that worked there. And we all had our own classrooms that were thematic. So I was in the business room. So the business room had a like pretend airport check-in thing, had a pretend bank and a pretend supermarket. And, you know, there was like a sports room where there was like a goal and basketballs. You know, to make it interactive, what would happen is local schools would come and visit us for, say, 3 or 4 days. And then usually Fridays, we would scout the school that was going to visit us next week, which would be based in Jing'an. And that's generally how it worked. But I think with us, we were due to finish at the end of January. But I think by maybe the first week of January, we'd done every school in Jing'an. So they basically said, we don't really have any work for you now, so rather than wait till the end of January, you can just start your holiday like now. So we're all like, okay, awesome.
yeah, was that kind of like a immersive language learning then? So you had to role play different scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, they did give us freedom to do what we wanted, in the classrooms that we were assigned, and whether it was like in my room, different stuff to do with airports or the supermarket or the bank. I think though, because they were trying to renew their contract local government bureau, they did the head office of the company I worked for. He was like a contractor, for providing foreign teachers to schools throughout Shanghai. They did come up with like a more like detailed curriculum. But when Chinese New Year happened, because what happened is, because our schedules were a lot more flexible than other teachers, because sometimes we wouldn't have that many classes to do on certain days. So we would be substitute teachers as well. And there's one school that I'd subbed at very short notice, like 3 or 4 times. And they really liked me. So they requested that, if I could be moved there for the next semester. So that's what happened from there. But I believe that after that, they had like much more detailed kind of plans to follow rather than, you do your own thing. But it was good though, because like the classes were only like 35 minutes long.
And then, so in terms of that's your work life, and then you did a second kind of, secondment in a different school. How did you find it socially? Were you friends with a lot of teachers you were with? Did you do any kind of extracurricular sports or clubs, or did you find other people online, or how did you kind of spend your evenings and weekends socializing or traveling?
Well, to be fair, in a lot of my spare time at that time, I would do like teaching or tutoring on the side. So I do a lot of, tutoring work at people's houses, and the going rate for that would be about 250 RMB an hour. So I mean, I was very busy back then. I mean, pretty much I'd be doing a combination of my working day and tutoring. I'd be working, and if you include like work and travel time, like 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and I'd have like one day to just rest and relax. But yeah, I mean, when I was at university, a guy who I became quite close to, and we're still pretty good friends to this day, we found out that we could be going to Shanghai together, but he was going to Shanghai to study at a university in Shanghai. So we met up a few times. I said my friend Mark, who moved to Chongqing, he came to visit a few times. And yeah, I'd say when I was in Shanghai, I tended to make more like Chinese friends rather than other foreigners.
That's quite unusual, because usually expats tend to hang around with expats. So you've done the thing which we all want to do, which is break into the local networks. But I guess you offered quite a good service for them by teaching them English. And then you got to have quite a personal relationship by talking to them in the language you're teaching them, perhaps?
Yeah, there was an element of that. I mean, to be fair, when I was in Guangzhou, when I moved to Guangzhou after Shanghai, like I did spend most of my time in terms of like the social aspect with other foreigners, mainly American, because there weren't really many British people in Guangzhou.
What was it like then when you were there? So once you got settled, what was it like just doing life admin, like going to the supermarket, kind of doing all the things you need to do? How did you find that? Because I think when I first went to the supermarket in Sweden, it took me 2 hours to the first shop, because I was trying to read everything and check if it was right. I bought the wrong bread because I bought something completely different. So then you don't know anything. When you're at home, you just know all the brands and you do it without even thinking, don't you? So how was that?
Well, the very first thing that I had to do when I moved into my flat is when you get apartments and housing in China, from what I can gather, 99% of the time they're fully furnished, which is good. But I didn't have any bedding. So the first thing I had to do was go to shop buy some bedding. And at that time, my Chinese language skills were like non-existent. So that was interesting, as you can imagine, turning to the shop and looking around at bedding and asking staff. And they were kind of like customers and staff trying to help me find the stuff I needed through like, like sign language and hand signals and all of that. But in the end, I got everything that I needed. In terms of stuff like groceries, that wasn't really that big a deal, because I'd say like 95% of the time I would eat out, because eating out was quicker, it was more convenient, and usually it would end up cheaper than cooking at home. I did have cooking facilities in my apartment, but it was usually only if there was something like I really, really wanted to eat, and I knew it was going to be either very difficult to find in Shanghai and or like really expensive. Otherwise, yeah, I didn't get that much stuff. It's mainly just water that I would say is like the main thing that I'd get. and like, washing powder and stuff like that. And also like my rent didn't include utilities, although the utilities would only end up being like 20 quid a month. I mean, most people probably spend that in 3 or 4 days in the UK now, like average utilities. But for me, it was about like 20 quid a month, and I had to go to a office in the building where I lived to pay that. And they mainly just laughed at me the whole time because my Chinese was so bad then.
Is it better now? Have you learned a lot of pinyin or?
But yeah, I've carried on studying Chinese ever since, and I did an exam in London about 2 months ago, and I failed it, but I was only, if I got like 1 or 2 more questions right, I would have passed it. So that was kind of frustrating, but also a pretty good benchmark of where I'm at now, because, that would have got, if I got 1 or 2 more and passed it, I would have got to like B1 in Mandarin.
It's tough. I remember learning it a little bit in my job, because we got given like opinion support, because we're working for a Chinese company, and working with a lot of Chinese people in meetings at 6 a.m. as they were going to bed. We were starting our day, so we would have a lot of meetings together, and just out of curiosity. But it was so hard to actually read the characters, so I got the like pinyin keyboards where you can like write out ni hao and things, and it would change it to the.
That's how I learned to do characters. Because the first year for me it was pinyin, but the thing is, I was in a because also this was the first time I was ever in a place where English was not like a known language. Because it's like you go to most kind of touristy places and most people can understand some English. In Shanghai, unless you went to like a really high-end restaurant or hotel, almost no one can speak English. So I was put in a situation where I kind of had to learn just to make day-to-day life much easier, and things like that.
The immersion worked for you then?
Oh, very much so, yeah. I mean, I did have classes as well. And again, my teacher at that time, we still kept in touch ever since. In fact, she's coming to London later this year with her son. And, we said that we'll meet up when she's here.
Oh, nice.
Things like that. I mean, she could speak English perfectly. And that was her job, was teaching foreigners Chinese freelance and that kind of thing. But yeah, for me, the immersion definitely worked. Because I remember just being so frustrated when I was there that like everything was really difficult and I couldn't understand even like the most basic of things, So I just thought, for no other reason, just to make my life here much easier, need to learn it.
Definitely. We are very privileged in English-speaking languages to that the international language is generally English. So people do either they're not English is the first language and they want to practice it, or they just know it so well. So as in Sweden, they have a higher English literacy rate than the England do, I think. The English is impeccable, which meant that my learning Swedish, if I was struggling, they just switched to English. And I'm like, no. I want to practice my Swedish. It was difficult for sure. I didn't need to immerse myself because my office was all English based and things like that. But I think it seems like you needed it more in China for sure, which was unfortunate, I guess. Fortunate and unfortunate, because it meant the days where it's tough. It's really tough because you might be tired, and when you're tired, having to think in another language is very difficult. And you want the comfort of being able to just to not have to do anything subconsciously. And if you can't go and read the road signs or the subway signs or whatever, it becomes an extra cognitive process you have to go through, which kind of just compiles that massively.
I wouldn't say it ever felt that way to me, because one of the things that I loved about it so much is it just felt like I was constantly having an adventure. I mean, even stuff like just going down to the shop that was next to my apartment to get some water, in a way, felt exciting. I guess because of that element of it, it just made everything a lot more fun. And indeed, I found that, I was able to connect with people a lot better once I spoke. Once I realised that, especially further down the line, and definitely now, that I can speak some Mandarin and things like that. I mean, even to this day, like, if I go to a Chinese restaurant, or if I'm talking with someone and I find out that they're, Chinese, I'll switch to Chinese, and it's always like, it opens up a completely, new world right there.
Well, people have different personalities, different languages, right? So you actually get to understand people's personalities in their home language or in other languages, depending on how they've learned it. People can be quite reserved in English if it's not their first language, because they know how to express themselves. Whereas you're right, if they can speak in Mandarin or in language which is your first choice and you can understand it, then you can understand someone's personality a lot more, which is quite interesting, I think, as well. Out of curiosity, did you go to Chinese New Year in Liverpool since moving back? Because it's meant to be one of the best in the country.
No, I haven't. I mean, I'd say that's one thing that was a big misconception I did have about China when I was there, because my mum came to visit me. around the time of Chinese New Year. But what happens in Shanghai is because about maybe, I don't know the exact percentage, but quite a lot of people in Shanghai, let's just say about 40% of people don't live or are not Shanghainese, and they come from other places. So what happens is they all leave and go home. So during Chinese New Year, Shanghai felt like a ghost town in comparison to normal times. Like, there was a lot less people, a lot of businesses were shut, and it was kind of a bit underwhelming compared to what I thought it was going to be. Maybe if I'd gone to like a small place where, where a lot of people are coming back, then maybe it would have been different. But yeah, there wasn't any like crazy celebrations as such. But I learned that's kind of what happens in the bigger cities in China, is everyone just goes home.
And then your second kind of location, where was that again?
So I said I was going to teach middle school, but I ended up teaching like primary school, which, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it and it was fun. But I've kind of, from the little exposure I'd had to teaching adults and stuff with tutoring, I found that I preferred that a lot more to children. So, but also at the time, I was looking into like manufacturing physical products, and obviously China's one of the best places you can do that, because part of like an online community that were about, say, private labeling a product and then selling it en masse using Fulfilled by Amazon or your own, say, website on Shopify and things like that. And of course, the main manufacturing hub for a lot of that stuff was Guangdong province, where Guangzhou is the capital. So I thought, okay, I should probably move there. So went on various websites, found a job at a university in Guangzhou, applied for it, got it, left Shanghai. So I had like a summer back home in the UK, except that this ended up being a bit stressful, because the thing with China is their policies and laws for things like, say, immigration are not consistent across the country. So the certificate that I'd used for teaching English to get me my Shanghai work permit was not accepted in Guangzhou. So I had to do the process all over again. And there's quite a lot of uncertainty about whether I was going to get this done in time or not, but I did. Yeah, so I think I came over initially on a tourist visa to Guangzhou for like a week. And then when my paperwork was ready, I went to Hong Kong to replace my visa with the work visa. Again, I don't think you'd be able to do that now, because they were a lot strict about all that kind of stuff. But back then it wasn't really a big deal. But then, yeah, once there, I, got a job at a university in Guangzhou.
What was university life in China like when you experienced it? Did you find it interesting to kind of observe student culture compared to UK or Europe?
It's very different to here, because one of the best examples I can give of this was the first week. It was Tuesday morning. I was teaching a freshman class, first year students, and I go to the classroom and there's no one there. So then I call someone from the admin department, who was in effect my boss. I was like, hi, I'm here, but there's no students here. And I'm 99% certain I'm in the right room. And then she explained, yeah, we forgot to tell you this. And university students start in China for the first 2-3 weeks. They do military drills. And then I look outside, onto the big sports field, and sure enough, there's a load of students in military uniform doing various drills. But, okay. Because that's actually one thing that did annoy me about China, was stuff like that. Is, say if there was something that they knew was going to happen like that, they won't really tell you until it's
the last minute.
Yeah, either very last minute or after it's already happened. And well, you knew this. Why didn't you tell me?
You can automate it now, right? Send the calendar invite out or something. Yeah.
That was one thing that shocked. Also, you go to university in the UK, and usually very few people who are from that town will go to a university in that town. I remember one of my classes at Lancaster was in the massive lecture theatre that they had, where there's maybe 200 or 300 students or whatever, all doing an economics class. And I think the guy lecturer said, how many people here are actually from Lancaster? And I think maybe 1 or 2 people put their hand up. But in China, it's quite different, because almost all of my students, I would say 90% of them, were from Guangdong province itself. Because apparently in China, when you're from a particular province, it's easier for you to go to a university in that province.
You say in-state and out-of-state. You pay different prices as well, I believe.
I wouldn't know about the American system specifically, but I believe that was how it worked in China, that if you're from Guangdong province, it was much easier for you to go to a university in Guangdong province than in another province.
To be honest, I went to Liverpool, so I couldn't go very far. But I lived in town, which is quite nice, and then I could go home for food.
Yeah, that sounds like quite a good arrangement, to be fair.
I suppose Lancaster's not that far either, because it's about an hour and a bit away.
Well, that was one of the reasons why it was a good choice, because I want to live away, but not too far away from home either. So it was a happy medium, because it took about an hour to get there. So in terms of like the students, so I said most of them were from Guangdong. Now, the other thing is, I don't know what it was like for you, but, you get like a class in university and there'll be people doing all kinds of different degrees and modules and all of that, and they'll end up in the same class. In China, basically, the class just stick together the entire time. Like, they're all doing the same degree and they all do the same classes, the same everything. So on campus, there was a building where teachers lived, and I think the top 2 or 3 floors were for the foreign teachers, and then there was other buildings where the students lived, so they lived in dorms. So I think like 4 of them would share a room together in bunk beds and have their own bathroom and stuff like that. Yeah, so like a lot of them became quite good friends and stuff like that. And also I don't know what it was like with other subjects, but English was a very feminine subject, because I'd say in all of my classes at least 90% of my students were girls. It was another thing that I noticed. Yeah,
quite more mixed because of the kind of business culture in China and how English is so important for the business world. I thought there might be more mixed, some for the language aspect and some for the career aspect. I thought it might be a bit of difference, but
that's what I thought it was going to be like. But no, at least for me, it was like 90% girls. In fact, I remember asking my friend Mark that, because he'd worked in university in Chongqing. Yeah, prior to me, it's like, yeah, all my students are girls. Was that like the case for you? And he's like, yeah.
And then, so you obviously you moved to this university, and how long were you there again for?
Just over 6 months, yeah. So I moved there in beginning of September 2015, and left at the end of March 2016. Yeah, nearly 7 months I was there. I mean, but the arrangement was quite different to Shanghai, because my pay was less than in Shanghai, but I had like housing provided, bills paid for. They had a cafeteria on campus, and if I was being very extravagant, I maybe would have spent like £2 on food like a day. Sometimes a lot less than that. I mean, don't get me wrong, it wasn't the best food in the world, but it was fine.
It was all profit then, basically.
But the way my contract worked, it was like an annualized hours kind of contract. The timing of when I got ill was quite unfortunate, because I remember we got to the next semester, and I think my boss had said to me and the other foreign teachers, you actually did almost all of your quota, like in the last semester. So in the second semester or something, like I did one class in Thursday morning and Thursday afternoon. So the class would be 45 minutes, 15-minute break, and then 45 minutes again, so hour and a half. And then another class on Friday morning, and that was it, with the same pay. Because I think if I went over the limit, they had to pay like £20 for every hour or something that did over it. So they said, so rather than that, we'll just give you like virtually no work, and you'll get the same pay. And in fact, I think one of my colleagues at the time, I think he just went on a trip every week, because it was like a 5-day weekend.
So you mentioned it before, but unfortunately you fell ill whilst you were out there in China. And how did that kind of manifest itself? Was it quite sudden? Was there signs to kind of show you were getting sick, or was it just the next day?
So what happened is, I remember it was Thursday the 10th of March 2016. I woke up because I had classes that day, and I remember feeling a bit ill, not like enough that I was going to call in sick or anything like that, but just felt quite rough, kind of thing, like an off day, as it were. So went and did my classes, went home, went to bed, and then throughout the night, I was vomiting all night and all the other stuff happened. So I called my boss the next morning. I was like, yeah, I'm sick, so I'll, I need to cancel class this morning. And I think the usual arrangement was, if you were sick for classes, you just do the class again, but like at another time when you're well. So called in sick, and I felt just generally run down and really ill. But one thing that I do remember thinking or noticing, but it wasn't something that concerned me that much, was my legs felt like a bit numb and weak, which I just dismissed as
fatigue and stuff.
Yeah, so this isn't really going to be a thing. So I start to feel better, everything else, but the numbness and the weakness gets much worse as the days go on. Now, I don't really remember why, but I was just ignoring it and being stupid.
Naivety, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah. And I remember when I finally came to my senses, I was going to a football match in Guangzhou, because Guangzhou, Evergrande at the time, they'd won the league. I think they won the league like 7-8 years in a row. So I had a season ticket that one of my students helped me buy, and they were playing in the Asian Champions League. So I went to the game. At this point, I can barely walk, and I'm sort of like struggling everywhere and stuff. Then, of course, I get to the stadium, I have to climb steps. I'm like, God, and then like I pretty much collapse on the stairs, and these security guards like carry me to the top. Now, one of my students who I was also friends with, he was in the stadium, and I was like, yeah, I'm kind of stuck here. Can you help me get a taxi? So then he came and found me and got a taxi back home, barely made it back into my apartment, went to bed, and then I was like, okay, I'm very sick. Something's really, really wrong here. So I called my boss the next day to say, yeah, I can like barely feel my legs and I can't like walk like at all, really. So I was like, okay, we'll take you to the hospital. So we went to a hospital in the center of Shanghai, and at first they thought it was some sort of like spinal issue and stuff like that. And obviously, back home, my parents were quite worried and all of that about, what was going on. As the days went by, it got worse, because they said, what we need to do is we need to do an MRI to find out what's wrong. And so I was kind of just held there in the hospital for a few days, and nothing was really happening. It was pretty boring, to be honest. And, having some treatment, got catheterized, which was a lot of fun, as you can imagine. Yeah, so then, like, it gets to the point where, like, I can't feel my legs anymore, and I think the only thing I could do was move my, like, left foot from side to side a little bit. So then the doctors are like, okay, we need to do the MRI now. So then they did the MRI, and they said, you've got, like, I mean, because obviously I I'm not a radiographer, I don't really understand what I'm looking at, but they said, the whole of your spine's inflamed. I was like, okay. So but we don't know what it is that's wrong with you. But they said we need to give you intravenous steroids to calm it down. And then, of course, this is where all the problems happen, because up to this point, because healthcare is not socialized in China like it is in the UK or most other developed countries, basically like for profit and you pay kind of thing. And I was supposed to have insurance with my job, and indeed my boss said, oh yeah, we have insurance for you, but what'll happen is you pay for your treatment, and if you run out of money, then we'll pay, and then we'll reclaim it from the insurance policy. And it's when I need this treatment, which costs about 12,000 RMB a day. It was, I needed, I think, 3 or 4 days worth. So it's like 1,200 quid a day. And my boss was like, yeah, the insurance isn't going to cover any of this. As you can imagine, I'm freaking out at this point.
Usually the insurance covers it when it's more expensive than you expect it to be. If it's like a tenner, okay, yeah, then it falls out your premium costs are higher than the cost of the treatment. Usually it's the other way around. It should help you with the more expensive stuff.
I can talk about it quite candidly now, but this was like the most stressful and frankly terrifying 9 days of my life at this point, because basically it's like, you need this treatment or you're going to die. But at the same time, if you can't get the money for it, then we're going to have to remove you from the hospital, which, to put it very morbidly, would have meant being left to die wherever they were going to dump me.
Surely the UK government should help you in that sense, or the embassy or something, or is that not possible to get in touch with them? Or
I did get in touch with them. They just gave like fairly generic advice about needing, a fit to fly letter. They pretty much said that there wasn't really anything that they could do.
So then how long after the diagnosis or the incident did you then get home?
So I was admitted to hospital on the 17th of March 2016, had the MRI a few days later, can't remember the exact day, and I was discharged, or I self-discharged myself from the hospital on the 26th of March 2016, stayed in like my friend's apartment for the next night, and then I flew home on the 27th of March. But I mean, what happened in terms of the money side is, I guess here I was fortunate that I was working for a government university that was trying to build connections all around the world and stuff like that, and enhance like exchange programs and that kind of thing. So they had like quite a lot reputationally on the line here if something happened to me. So basically my boss said, okay, we're going to pay for your treatment, but you have to pay us back. Having basically no choice, I was like, okay, So my treatment, was paid for, and I had it, and thankfully it worked a lot better than anyone anyone could have hoped. I mean, I was still basically paralyzed from the waist down, but my upper body, like, yeah, was fine. And like, had enough where if I'd supported myself a lot with my upper body, I was semi-mobile, although I just had a wheelchair. But I realized that, you know, this is going to cost a fortune. And obviously my parents are freaking out. And I remember thinking, okay, I've got to get back home. I cannot stay here because I'm not getting the care that I need. I'm very, very sick. And, you know, it's just simply not an option to stay here. And I remember, like, my dad telling me that they'd been talking to countries about getting medical evacuation from China. And I think the lowest quote they had was like over $100,000 or something. So yeah, it was pretty stressful.
Yeah, it's a lot of money for one flight, effectively, or for one trip, which, you know, is quite a setback for years worth of work, I suppose, and things. That's incredible. But obviously, you're okay now, which is a good thing, or you're 99% back. And
yeah, so because I didn't want to leave China. I mean, you know, because when it first started, a few people kind of said when I would have been able to, like, maybe you should go home for that. But I'm thinking, well, no, I'm really happy here. I don't want to move. You know, because I was, you know, I had like a solid like friend group of, you know, American guys. We'd go eat out like every weekend. You know, I really liked my job a lot. I developed a really good relationship with a lot of my students, and many of whom I still talk to even this day. You know, I was dating a girl at the time. You know, it was just everything was, up until that point, was going awesome for me, you know?
Yeah, you were living your 20s out, right? And that's what everyone does. Yeah, and that's the wonderful thing.
But yeah, managed to make it back to the UK on the 27th, because one of the things that I'd said to the doctor, I kind of explained to him, and he was nice, to be fair, and he could speak English well. I was like, look, I cannot continue treatment here. I need to go home. But one of the things I need from you is like a fit to fly letter. And I was not fit to fly at all by any reasonable definition. But he was like, yeah, okay. So then he just wrote me a letter in Chinese and in English saying I was fit to fly. And, you know, when I got my ticket and showed it to the airport staff, they're like, okay. So then they just got me, you know, wheelchair assistance throughout Guangzhou, Hong Kong, where I transited. And then obviously once I arrived back in Manchester.
The kind of journey back home then, did you kind of have your stuff still in China, or how did you get it all back? How was that like?
So what happened is one of my friends, his name was Carl, he's American. He came to visit me quite a few times in the hospital and stuff. I went with him back to their apartment and basically just slept on their couch for the night. When I was going back to the UK, they took my apartment key, or I gave it to them rather. Then they went to my apartment, which is on the campus. And I think they were directed by students to my apartment to get my stuff. So they basically just crammed it all in the suitcase and backpacks and this, that, and the other. Only two things they couldn't take was obviously the key to the apartment because they didn't need it anymore, and my work permit. Those two things had to be left behind, but again, I didn't need them at that point. So they went and got my things on the afternoon of the night I was flying. And then one of my students came with me to the airport because, you know, we were quite good mates at that point. And one of my other mates like arranged an Uber to get us to the airport.
So you made some really good friends out there then, and good environment for you to have been in. It's quite lucky, I suppose, in that sense.
If it wasn't for them, I'm not sure how else I would have made it back, because obviously, you know, the money issue was, you know, quite a serious one at the time, because like my boss claimed that she and some of her colleagues were like funding my care. I don't know if that was true or not. Again, I was never shown any paperwork. I was just told how much my treatment was costing and how much they were paying. So, but of course the problem was I was basically like being watched like a hawk in the hospital by university staff and some students that they kind of dispatched there to keep me company and to talk to me, but also kind of report back on what I was saying and what I was doing and all of that. And of course, they got wind that I was going to discharge myself, you know. So then my boss said, well, you owe us all this money, you know, all that. And we had a pretty intense argument for about 4 hours where she was like, well, she coerced me to sign an agreement that I was going to pay back, albeit the agreement was written entirely in very complicated English. I mean, what she done is she just gone onto the web and like got a template, you know, some sort of agreement thing. But I remember thinking, because she was starting to ask me like, you know, where's your passport and all that kind of stuff. So I remember thinking, okay, if I don't sign this, you're going to stop me from leaving China. And this was a problem because all my stuff, including my passport, was in my apartment on the campus of the university, you know. So I thought, so if I sign this, you seem to think that, you know, you have like a cast iron guarantee of getting the money back, even though they should have got insurance in the first place, or at least told me that the insurance I had was basically worthless. And again, they just made up stuff. I mean, I remember like when she was going through various things like, oh yeah, this injection's not covered because the needle that was used for the injection was not made in China. And, as far as I was concerned, they were just making up reasons to not pay various things.
So did you end up having to pay it all back at the end, or?
No, because like I said, I was pretty sure that once I was out of China, there was nothing they could really do. And sure enough.
That's really...
Yeah, well, don't be wrong, I was kind of anxious about the time, but I remember thinking, okay, I can deal with this later. I have to get out of China, is the key thing. And once I signed it, she backed off immediately. I was like, oh, yeah, okay. Because I think she thought she had some sort of cast iron guarantee to get the money back. Then my friends went to the apartment, and then I got a plane ticket with Cathay Pacific. Flew from Guangzhou to Hong Kong, which is about 30 minutes. And then from Hong Kong to Manchester, which was 14 hours.
It was tough, right?
Yeah, wasn't too bad. I mean, I just stayed in the seat the whole time and just tried to get some sleep. Just because of the circumstances, I maybe only slept 2 hours a night for nearly 2 weeks. I think they did have Star Wars on the movie, The Force Awakens. I think I just watched that when I was away from the plane. Yeah, that was the one good thing about the journey. But yeah, in terms of the money, because I remember thinking, it's I'm pretty sure that, first of all, the circumstances are incredibly dodgy anyway, is the first thing. But also, because you're going into the realms of international law and, jurisdictions and all that kind of stuff, I'm thinking it's probably not going to be possible for them to do anything, or if it is, it'll cost an absolute fortune and well more. Just for clarity, the total amount of my treatment I think was around 55,000 RMB, so £5,500, and all of my money had been basically used for treatment, which was, I think at the time as well, maybe £1,000. And I think they said the insurance paid out 15,000 RMB or something like that. But what was funny is my boss didn't get in touch with me for a long time until I got back to UK. It was 2 months later or so. Well, I think in the intervening period, I think my mum texted my boss on WeChat, to say, yeah, John's in hospital. He's very sick. He can't talk to you at the moment, whatever. Then 2 months later, she comes back, and then the amount that she was claiming mysteriously dropped substantially from, as I said, 55,000 RMB to, I think it was just over 20,000 RMB. It's okay, right. So two things have happened here. Actually, two things have happened. One is that you were lying about what it was to begin with, because again, I never saw any paperwork, so I never knew what it was. Or she's realised that she hasn't a hope in hell of getting any money, and that if it's lowered or if it's reduced, that I would be okay, and just pay it. I wasn't going to pay it simply out of principle, but also I was, completely broke at the time and had no money and no sources of income. And at the end of the day, the payments that they were asking for were more than what my salary was, even though I had no money and they knew that. But they were willing to compromise, and they sent a few angry emails, and that was the end of them, more or less.
So one of the abrupt end, scary one, I'm sure, for you at the time, but all good to hear that it's kind of eased out now and you've landed on your feet, for lack of a better expression, I suppose now. But you've kind of recovered in more ways than one, so professionally, physically, and I'm sure psychologically after that quite a stressful time.
Yeah, it wasn't the best. When I got back to the UK, I went to hospital more or less right away, and was in hospital for 6-7 weeks. Discharged, and then I had a relapse again where my left arm went funny, I couldn't.
So have you got back to a full quality of life then and things? Are you able to do exercise and stuff, or is that still quite difficult? Or
there's a few things I kind of need to adapt to and stuff, and just be mindful of, but day to day now, it doesn't affect me much.
Is there anything more you wish to discuss about your life living abroad before we go into the next section? So welcome back to the podcast, Conversation 3, which, John, is a kind of review of your time. So I guess the first question I kind of ask my guests is, you can go back to when you were about to leave for your kind of experience abroad, and you could either give yourself a bit of advice or change something. What might it be that you would kind of tell yourself, or would you avoid potentially whilst you were away?
I would have made a bigger effort to have learned Chinese more before I went, because a bit like I said earlier, I just assumed that China was going to be like most places and that most people would speak English reasonably well. So definitely focus a lot more on the language, but also just just enjoy it and like try to focus where you can less on the admin of life. I mean, for example, before I went to China, I like researched banks and stuff like that, that would have connections to the UK, and I saw that they had like HSBC in China. So I went through quite a bit of hassle at the time to open up a HSBC account in the UK, only to find out once I went to China that I didn't get to pick my bank account, the company did, and that was completely pointless. Because I just assumed that, say, for sending money home, that if I had a HSBC account in China, it'd be much easier to send it back to a UK HSBC account.
Your IBAN numbers come important, right, and stuff, and your BIC, is it BIC or back?
Yeah, and as I said, in the end, realised that all that exercise was completely pointless. Also, obviously, in hindsight, and again, for anyone who's watching who is thinking about teaching English in a country like China and even knows someone that's teaching English in China, I thought I was dead unlucky. The insurance policy that the university bought for me was a load of crap. But then I realised this is the norm. What it seems that they do is that, I think by law they have to get you insurance, but they get you like the bare minimum.
The brass level.
Yeah, which trust me, it isn't worth having. So definitely get insurance before you go. I mean, obviously you can get like private medical insurance, but that's probably quite expensive. But I do believe that there are, like, say, long-term travel insurance policies or policies that are more designed for something like teaching English in China.
I know there's like nomad.
I've heard of that one, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe that might work for you guys in teaching Chinese or teaching English in China or abroad. But it all depends on like your length of stay in the country might be the limiting factor on that. I'm not too sure.
Yeah, and your circumstances. But I would say, yeah, do not rely on your employer. I mean, just don't be wrong, until that point, I had a fantastic relationship, with everyone at the university. I got on with, like, everybody, most of my students were awesome, but they'd, if you like, cheaped out massively on this quite important detail, and, it ended up causing a lot of stress for me and a lot of, hassle for them that otherwise wasn't necessary. So, yeah, definitely would have got, a proper insurance policy before going out, for sure. When you had those chances, I mean, I don't regret it so much, because I think, one day I'll get the chance to go back and go to those places, but it would have been a lot easier at the time if I'd just done it. So just enjoy being there and make the most of all the opportunities to travel around and things like that is what I would have told myself, in addition to, making an effort to learn the language and having proper insurance in place.
Yeah, it's a very good point. But also, I guess you were building relationships in Shanghai through your work or through the time you spent tutoring as well as the job you were doing. So it's kind of thing where if you'd have gone travelling more, you would have regretted not spending as much time where you were living and seeing all the amazing things on your doorstep. So there's not enough time in the day to do both, is there? So.
Yeah, it's swings and roundabouts, and I'm the kind of person where, like, I'm quite happy to be, social, but I'm also just as happy as doing, like, my own thing by myself. So, but yeah, as you say, either way, yeah, would have been, like, different things that which would have changed if I'd done things differently anyway. So,
what advice would you give to people who were to move anywhere in the world, then perhaps maybe not China and for any of the work? Is there something you would say to someone apart from maybe learn the language or get insurance? Is there anything else you could think about?
Be open-minded and accept that they probably do things quite differently to the way that you're used to, and to just accept that and roll with the punches, as it were. As I said, one of the things that did my head in China was them, like, not telling you stuff that was quite important until the last minute. So sometimes I would just ask, these things so that I would know in advance where possible about things that were going to happen and things like that. But I'd say that's the main thing. Be open-minded and accept that, especially if you go to somewhere like China or somewhere that's quite, far away from the UK, that the way they do things will be quite different to what you're used to, and just embrace it.
Yeah, it can be. It's a very, very valuable bit of information. Is there anything else you wish to kind of touch upon with your whole experience living abroad, from manifesting it to begin with to now you've had time to come back and reflect on it, or you kind of tapped out on it now? Do you plan to go anywhere else in the future, for instance?
Despite what happened, I mean, it's worst experience of my life, like the most, stressful. Yeah, I mean, pretty much like 2016 for me, like, my life was a, living nightmare, for the most part. I suppose I was either going to go one way or the other way, like, never go anything near, like, China again, want nothing to do with the place anymore, Yeah, but now I kept WeChat, kept in touch with most of my students and friends and whatnot. And, through civil service, looked at going back to work there, in a UK diplomatic kind of capacity. Haven't been successful yet, but other opportunities may come up where I'll have the chance to do that.
Would you consider any other countries other than China? Or is the language now in your favour? That is
the language and experience is in my favour to the point where I feel like, although don't get me wrong, there's other places I'd be interested in going, that I'd be going back to square one, whereas I've advanced myself quite far. Because I suppose that's one of the thing that one piece of advice I give to people is, I think especially the last 15 years or so, we're kind of having it pushed on side hustles and projects and all that, and trying to be good at everything. And I would say what's much more effective is to find stuff that you like and that you're good at as well. I'm not saying this is easy, obviously, but when you find that, and especially if you can, find a way to make, a career out of it or a living, then at that point become tunnel vision. Stop trying to be really good.
All things to all people. Yeah.
Well, it's a bit like this quote I remember that really stuck with me is, trying to be everything for everyone will end up being nothing for no one. Something like that. So once because I really, really like learning Mandarin, and I've carried on learning it on and off. I've had fairly long periods where I haven't studied it and then periods where I have, but it's always been there so that when I have started learning again, it's been pretty easy for me to get back into the groove of it.
Got a good baseline.
Yeah.
Well, amazing. Well, thank you for your time, John. I really, really appreciate catching up. And one thing I love about doing this podcast is someone who, for yourself, I've known since I was, 12, 11 or something. We've kind of known each other in school and did Target 2.0 together and things. I knew you for economics and a few other things outside of school, but not so much on this kind of level. You delve into quite a deep thing about someone's life. One of my good friends from uni, who's from South Africa, I did a podcast with him, and I learned so much about his life before I knew him, because my life started with him once he'd already moved. I didn't need to ask those questions. I was probably selfish and ignorant, but it's really interesting to have that kind of deeper connection with someone about their life. I think you get to a lot of important things which get discussed, and yeah, it's good to see that you're thriving now and that you have opportunity to kind of relive your life abroad in the future potentially. And yeah, I wish you all the best. But just thank you for spending time with me and sharing your story.
Yeah, thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to talk today.
Always, yeah. And if you want me to share your social media or anything, I can put it in the show notes for people to go and find you and then get in touch with you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Cool. Right. Well, as always, if you did enjoy the podcast and you do want to find out a bit more, then please do give us a follow, give us a subscribe, all that fun stuff you see. And we'll see you next time for the Expat Pod.